Welcome to Cycles versus Blender Render. In this video, we're going to go over how Blender Render is generally quick and you get a reasonable result quickly. It's as simple as that. And it uses only your CPU, that's the central processing unit in your computer. Now, Cycles itself is a physical-based renderer and is accurate, but it does take longer. It is designed for GPUs, which is a graphics card essentially, but runs fine on CPUs as well. And we'll go in later on how to configure these to be better and render a little more quickly. So why are we using Cycles? Well, we are using Cycles since we are modelling a lamp. It's a light, it's a great time to introduce you guys to Cycles. The two are not cross-compatible, okay? So there's no real switching between the two and expecting what you've done in one to come across to the other. That is important to know at this stage. So you can use other renderers too if you have access to them, but we won't be covering these in detail. Some of the supported renders we can have a look at if we quickly hop over to the Blender website. So here we are on the Blender website. If we go to, I believe it's under download and external renderers, we can see there's a list of other renderers that do work directly with Blender themselves. Things like V-Ray and Octane also work, but they're not listed on this list at the moment. So there we go, there's a series of, I'm going to stop scrolling up and down randomly. There's a series of external renders that if you already have access to, you may want to use. They all have their own pluses and minuses as well, and that's always worth bearing in mind. So none of those are absolutely perfect. So render time differences, this is an important consideration. I will be showing you in a few moments 3 clips of a 4-second bowling ball animation that I mocked up a while ago, a couple of weeks ago now. The Blender render itself came to only 2 minutes for that 4-second clip. Now that's quite a long time to wait for 4 seconds, but at I think it was 30 frames a second, it was actually doing 120 renders in that time. A basic Cycles render, well, that took 15 minutes, and a thorough Cycles render took 4 hours. So you can see immediately how being lean with all of this will help massively, especially if you're doing a thorough render towards the end. You don't want to spend 4 hours only to find something wasn't working properly. It would be better to do a basic Cycles render at some point rather than go for the full one, and then when you're happy, bumping it up and doing the full one. So I quickly show you that video now. But here we have Blender Render, and as you can see, it's a relatively good mock-up straight away. Skipping straight into Cycles, a low pass there, we get a relatively grainy and horrible result. So here's a reminder of the Blender Render, and then if we skip straight over into Cycles again, but this time spending a lot more time on the render, we get a very polished model. So what's the solution here? Well, neither really. The Blender render is great for getting stuff out quickly. That whole scene, it was only 4 seconds long, took about 2 minutes to render, something like that. The Cycles, the very basic grainy one, took almost 15 minutes to render. The Blender render again, back down to 2 minutes, and that really polished one, we can see the end frame here of it. Well, that takes a silly amount of time. That took nearly 4 hours. Now, is that worth it? Probably not in this case. Now, the main thing that's going to determine your render speed is your machine specs. So let's have a look at the CPU at the moment. Now, just like graphics cards, there are going to be a lot of different machine specifications. They're going to vary massively across every one of you guys taking the course here. The simple rule is the more cores you have and the higher the frequency of your CPU, the better. So if you've got an 8-core 4 GHz processor, it's going to be faster than a dual-core 3 GHz processor. Simple as that. You're unlikely to hit any memory limits when using CPU rendering, because if your system runs out of memory, it often goes on to virtual memory, but we won't delve into the details of that at the moment. It is important at this point to know that you cannot use CPU and GPU rendering at the same time in the same instance of Blender. So your machine specs again, but this time focus on the graphics card. So NVIDIA cards, any that support what they call CUDA, which any modern NVIDIA card is going to do. ATI AMD cards, the support has started in Blender 2.75, but it's not complete. And you may have memory issues if you're using a graphics card, a GPU. And the simple reason for that is some cards just don't have as much RAM as your computer would. A lot of cards may have 1 or 2 gigabytes, and you may be sat with a computer that's only got 1 or 2, but it can switch over to the virtual memory. However, if it runs out of memory on your graphics card, that's it can't do anything, it's just run out of memory and will fail. If in doubt, or you are having trouble, remember you can switch to CPU rendering at any point. So that concludes this round of Cycles versus Blender Render. Now there's no reason to not use either one of these, it all depends on the application you're going to be using it for. As they are interchangeable, not as in switchable between one another, but you can use a Blender Render to work out a scene's animation quickly or mock it up really quickly, get it out there to the person you're working with or even yourself to make sure that it is what you want, before then going back and manipulating the same meshes using Cycles to make a much more realistic render. You can do a mix of them both. In this section we are using Cycles, and in the next few lectures we'll get Blender set up so that it can use Cycles well, and we'll also compare CPU versus GPU for your particular machine so you know which one is quicker. However, that's it for now, and I will see you in the next lecture.